following Elizabeth, we work together and we bounce ideas, and very often we try to have constructive conflict. We try to, see, because sometimes we come from very different positions. I tend to be more in the camp of overt instruction and scaffolding, and she's more in the camp of let it emerge, let it emerge. So we have those tensions, and that's why these dialogues are really important, and we need to test that balance point in different contexts for different learners. And it's not something that 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people can do. It takes a whole village and villages to do that. So we have theories that's been shared since the morning, with definitions that's been shared since the morning. So the focus of this presentation really is to, again, give an exemplification of our efforts in the K-12 learning context in the Singapore education sector. So fostering 21st century skills through a collaborative critical reading and learning analytics environment. This is one of my intervention projects through funding from the National Research Foundation, EduLab funding program. And today I'll just focus a little bit more in the limited time on our users, on our learners. And we keep talking about how we can design, and learning analytics is about understanding and optimizing learning. And the younger we go, often if our learners go younger, the less we ask them about their learning, the less opportunities we touch base with them and hear their voice, and in the definition of agency, giving them a voice and getting feedback and involving them in the design of their learning, in the design of data, meaningful data, or what we count as meaning. So to me, I try to privilege the learner, and in this case, these are secondary 3 English language learners in Singapore in one school. So my team, as well as to acknowledge not only from NIE, but also the collaborating school, which is Ngee Ann Secondary School, who actually, the principal leads this project, together with the HOD of EL, as well as the HOD of ICT. And we have also a policy supporter from TFL, a supporting officer coming in, and we try and have these dialogues to see how can we move a sort of micro case of implementation, of design-based implementation research in the field of learning analytics and computer-supported collaborative learning forward together, step by step. So again, I won't harp on this too much, but in the learning analytics field, how we see that use cases and empirically based understandings of learners' experiences, especially in secondary schooling, and especially in Asian education context. Shane Roeder, I think, highly referenced and cited with his collaborators on a lit review or comprehensive review of the field of learning analytics. Relatively rare, it's a real burgeoning field of scholarship, but relatively rare such secondary schooling in Asian education context. So that's our modest contribution here. In the specific context of collaborative critical reading and learning analytics, in one Singapore high school, developed in light of the new revised 2010 EL curriculum syllabus, privileging the student voice. So here today we highlight their learning the perceived learning benefits and problematics of a learning visualization dashboard, a student dashboard. All right, components. And this was primarily focusing on critical reading development, which we know today, arguably know quite well that it's strong fundamentals for language and literacy development, productive participation in 21st century global economies, right? However, in Singapore, you'll hear this quite a lot, not only English language, but social studies, general knowledge, where deep dialogic and generative social practice, engaging with texts or messages in whatever modalities, to get students to engage deeply with that, critically with that, and then respond and verbalize and react, as a group, as a community, as a form of rich social dialogic practice. Teachers observe, and our teachers observed, that students struggle to do that, in part due to time. So in a class, 40 minutes, they have 2 periods. The critical debate starts and 2 students articulate, and that's all we have time for. Ding, ding, you know. And in our schools, I think in this school it plays, it's a what? What's that song? What's the NAS? No, he was the principal of NAS before, ex-principal of Nghi Secondary School. So they play a little chime and everybody moves on to the next class. Now, these are our impetus, right? Our impetus was that in the EL curriculum and reflecting the intentions of the new EL curriculum, we needed to extend more space, more time in the curriculum for 21st century multimodal literacies. We wanted to also, our intention was also to extend the opportunities for students to engage more in cognitively challenging and technologically engaging ways, right, beyond class time. And thirdly, a key challenge in the current setting in terms of developing critical reading dispositions was the limited access, right, to meaningful and timely formative feedback on critical reading engagement and broader literacy development. Any EL teachers curriculum in CPDD here? English teachers, no? Okay, or math or any subject, right? How often do your students get formative feedback on their performance in the class? Average. How many times? A semester or a term? One term, how many weeks, roughly? 10 weeks, okay. In that 10 weeks, how many weeks are taken out for exams? 2, okay. Now, we are left with 8, okay. Now, in that 8, how often do our students get formative feedback, right? Perhaps we have time, for some amounts of formative feedback. But what forms do those formative feedback take? Usually, okay? Usually? Anybody has a guess? Come on, teachers. Usually. Quizzes, very good. The best formative feedback that you have encountered or you have implemented as a teacher before going to MOE, yeah? Quiz, okay, very good. And what's your feedback to your student that you give in terms of the quiz? Very timely quizzes. Scores, okay. Good, the best teacher, best formative feedback. What do you give them? Question-based feedback, meaning? Yeah, great. That you have seen? Yeah, that's awesome. That's fantastic. How often do we see that, right? I mean, those are questions. So I'm not saying that I'm not saying now your expectations are very high. I'm not saying that WeRead is providing excellent formative feedback. Do not judge me and my visualizations later, but we are making an effort. But these were the challenges that inspired our research design in this particular intervention project. So you see, these are the students. And these were the intentions, the pedagogical intentions, the learning intentions, and these were embedded under, informed by theories, right? That we wanted to develop a web-based collaborative critical reading and learning analytics environment to deepen critical reading fluency, right? So we had the questions up front, at least. We're not sure that we have found the answers, but we could only start with the questions. We wanted to deepen critical reading fluency and deepen appreciation of collaborative dialogic critical reading, all right? So WeRead can be summarized in terms of 2 big learning affordances, all right? 2 big learning affordances. One was the multimodal social dialogic learning attribute of the WeRead platform, okay? That was one. So we believe that, critical reading and critical engagement comes from dialogic, collaborative dialogic learnings, reading. So they need to read a text together, they need to comment. They not only need to comment, they need to reply to other people, because what we see our students doing, and a lot of our learning structures in schools are individual learning, right? So a lot of students, even the generative ones, generative thinking, they can articulate, they can ideate, but they do not necessarily get sufficient scaffolding or guidance or modeling of how do you generate, not in isolation, but in response as a generative social practice with your peers or with your teachers. Second learning affordance is dynamic. Our intention is dynamic. We are halfway there, and it can always get more dynamic. But more than dynamism is meaningfulness and purposefulness, and that's what are constantly guiding us. And we find that it's a very iterative process. And my developer is so stressed by the iterative process because our third and final trial is in 2 weeks' time. We all know school starts on the 27th of June, okay? So my, right, 27th of June for secondary school, term 3, yeah? And my developer is so green. He's at home working very hard on the programming, changing the visuals, and it's really iterative. So these are the 2 fall learning affordances, but he'll be here tomorrow to present his book. So then we have, and those are underpinned by our desired learning, our intended pedagogical aspirations and intentions, right? And our desired learning outcomes. Okay, I want to expand on this, but then I just wanted to highlight that because it's in critical reading, in the critical reading field, there is the Multiliteracies pedagogical framework that was developed by the New London Group in 2016 that actually amalgamated 4 camps of literacy education up to that point, which, there were big debates for a long time. I won't expand on it now, between the people who are the phonics camp and the whole language camp and the heritage culture, and how you develop literacy and language and literacy. But chose Multiliteracies pedagogical framework and a socio-constructivistic dialogic learning theory, right? And these are just, I can unpack it to anyone who's interested later, but the knowledge processes are in the middle. And on the outside, so conceptualizing by name, experiencing the known, conceptualizing by naming, analyzing functionally, and applying appropriately. And on the outside, in the rectangular boxes, are the pedagogical tools. So situated practice is very important for the learners. Overt instruction, which is why I say me and Elizabeth have differing scales of what counts as scripting and over-scripting scaffolding. Then there's critical framing and transform practice. So these are the underpinning theories, right? And how this is operationalized, because we said one of the learning affordances is collaborative critical reading. So you need to have scaffolds for the students, right? So scaffolds, when we put a text on, there's a text on the left, right? There's a text, I don't know, yeah, there's a text. And this is what you see, sorry, I cut back on the slide so it's a little bit weird. The text on the left, and on the right, this is what you see, right? There are 7 critical lenses and 5 critical tags or toggles. So before a student posts a comment, they have to think, okay, choose one critical lens and one comment type. Now, what critical lens are you using? Is it message? Is it purpose? Is it audience, assumption, point of view, inference, or the impact of language and visuals? So those are pertinent to the domain, and they're pertinent to the critical reading knowledge development. Secondly, I think so because I agree, I disagree, and I need to ask, are critical talk types? And this was based on a separate study. Think is ideate. I think so because is elaborate, right? You guys know this very well. Because justify, sorry. I agree is an interactional disposition, right? I agree meaning validate, right? Disagree, challenge. I need to ask, clarify. Very often we don't scaffold our students to clarify. We don't highlight that as important. So they have to actually choose a combination of critical lens and critical talk type before they post. And as they hover over the message, each of these tags, there is scaffolding that pops up for them. So if you don't know what message is, a message critic lens is for a text, there are 4 prompts there, all right? And it's a purposeful choice that unlike Knowledge Forum, we don't just let students hover over and then choose it. We didn't want, to us, that went into over-scripting and over-reliance. We just wanted that as a reference point, and students still had to think about and formulate their own questions, all right? Even though in terms of programming or technological sophistication, it appears it's more efficient if they could just hover over it and click it, and then it becomes a sentence starter. So that's a debate, design debate that's ongoing. So yeah, we have multimodal text, innovation context, uploaded over 16 weeks in 2 semesters. It's a design-based research, so that was 2 trials. Weekly 30 minutes formal reading period in school, plus personal and informal out-of-class time. Actually, that was a design change as well. In trial 1, it was just, informal learning, outside of class time, homework. That didn't work for our students, and I'll touch on that as one of the, problems. And then in trial 2, we formalized a 30-minute reading period in the school. And that took, it seems like, 30 minutes in a school day, that was significantly challenging for the school to actually carve out 30 minutes for critical reading engagement over a sustained period of time, which was only 6 weeks in secondary 3. So we'll talk about time. Time keeps coming up. So there are 4 components very quickly in my dashboard. There's an achievement, which is based, hooked into the teacher's portal for results. CA1, SA1, those are the semestral exam and the mid-semestral exams. Then we have the learning attitudes and 21st century skills, which are based on their self-reports, their self-perceptions. Then my critique and discussion profile is based on their behaviors online, their critical lenses that they use, the number of comments, the number of likes, the number of replies to their comments over the number of texts, over the number of weeks that we read in the school. And my social learning network map, which is based on who they reply and who they interact with, all at a class level. So that's what, this is just some example of very rudimentary sort of visualizations right at the start. And as you can see there, I'm an exemplification of Dragon's Point. Like, who in the world thinks of, no, I'm sorry, that was a very bad imitation of your voice. He was a lot more, he was a lot more, manly, right? So, yes, no. Who in the world thought that we should use class average? And I use class average in my trial 1 and my trial 2. You'll be glad to know we removed it for trial 3. Yes, before he said this. No. yes. Iterative process. I did read. No. Anyway, there's no, actually the reasons for this is we discussed what we want to visualize with the teachers. And to some extent, we replicated also logics and social logics and mindsets that we always do in school. And sometimes it's not, we knew that there was a debate about whether we should, about non-referencing and what we show students. But very often, my dear teachers and MOE colleagues, and what do we show students as a marker point? Do you show them peer best? Okay, we often show them in achievement what they could possibly get as the top score, what you could possibly get, right? And then what's the problem is showing people their top score or your top best. And this was very common. We got that from our teacher a lot, and we got that from our, our colleague, and even my own teammates, like my RA, my research assistant, Christine, and Sabrina, and my developer. Would you prefer users, right? Would you prefer we visualize to you the class average or yourself compared to the class average or the class best? We ask this, right? We're all users of dashboards. So guess what they would choose? Class average or class best or top possible? What would they want? Average, why?
Well, you don't want to know what the best is because then you know you're always below it.
What?
You're always below the best unless you are the best.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. Unless you are the best, you are always below the best, right? So, why would I want to know the best? Okay, I can never get that unless I'm the best, okay? So average is safer. There's safety in numbers. There's safety in average. I just need to know if I'm above or below average. But we know the problems associated with average because the high-performing students think, oh, I'm good. Actually you're not good, and average, there's no student in the class named average. And that's a deep issue, right? Who's average? Which teacher has ever called, hello, average, can you wake up and answer this question? Never, right? Okay? All right, so essentially we gave students 4 tabs and components on their discussion profile, okay? And here they can see, these are sociograms, all right, where they can see who's, teachers can see this too, so they know early, upfront, and over the weeks, and the map changes over the weeks, who are the disengaged students. And here we run into serious ethics and privacy issues and responses to that, right? Okay, and it just occurred to me that in my consent form, I should probably include an additional note unless I want to be in the next academic in the paper in Singapore. So we just had a recent Yeah, newspaper case. But anyway, you see the teacher and you see the students, and teachers and students can see how influential they are to the discussion and the debate on the text. And yeah, this is what we show them. So I just want to give you a quick sense from one class and one comparison class to 3 classes in trial 2 with 3 comparison classes. And we use a series, how do we evaluate the impact on learning outcomes and compare that, how do we evaluate that compared to our desired learning outcomes and pedagogical intentions. So we had a range of pre-post critical reading tests, questionnaires, online behavioral data, student focus groups, as well as feedback forms for all the students. And they were the FGD participants were purposefully selected to reflect diverse users, differing levels of usage, of achievement, as well as vocality in the class. Because some of the teachers noticed that actually some of the students who are very quiet in class actually are very engaged online because it was a different modality, right? It's not surprising. Very quickly, overall, we read in those quasi-experimental, in those 2 design iterations, we achieved demonstrable and acknowledged learning gains, all right? So we had improvements in desired student learning outcomes like EL confidence, cognitive playfulness, curiosity especially, not so much creativity, and teacher relatedness emerged very strongly. And it was interesting because it was only 10 weeks and the teachers, I guess, the students felt to some extent in the FGDs, they elaborated on it. Even one comment and one reply from the teacher as compared to, you know, in a big class setting really enhanced that teacher relatedness and trust. It was deep learning, all right? All these went up from a sort of reread within repeated t-test, right? And a drop in the, arguably less adaptive learning disposition of just learning for performance. So we were, as you can see, we're aiming for mastery here to some extent, or at least a balance between performance and mastery. When we looked at them compared to the reread classes compared to the comparison classes, as you can see from the repeated measures ANOVA, that I'm only highlighting a number of the significant results here. Of course, there are non-significant results as well. So learning engagement, emotional, was significantly different. The blue is the comparison class and the green is the reread class, yeah? So even the change in trends over time. Teacher-student relatedness, which was what I was pointing to earlier, and critical reading fluency. And I had a discussion with my colleague earlier from the exams board that we had to develop our own tests because we're talking about critical reading processes and thinking processes. And very often, even though the learning outcome was embedded into the formal curriculum of EL, right? And that was even reflected in the exam questions, all right? Any past EL teachers here? But what happened was, so we thought that the CA and SA would be natural points of triangulation of achievement or development of critical reading skills. But when it was enacted into the marking scheme, teachers still regress to accuracy, technicalities. Okay, very common in EL. If you're an EL teacher, you'll know what I mean. EL being English language. So yeah, so what happened was we had to develop a critical reading fluency or procedural fluency test such that we could give feedback to the students that at least procedurally, they're applying the critical reading knowledge processes. But you're not there yet in terms of accuracy, but there's an extension of the kind of learning points and data points that they get about their learning. Students' quality of critical discussions improved, that's what teachers observed, and heightened engagement and motivation, especially when they became aware of their own learning profile through LA dashboard maps. But I'm not quite there at the learning dashboards here. These are like the overall, right, benefits of reread. And they talk about how it was great because you get teacher feedback. The social network of the class was interesting and fun. They got to debate, but part of this is the CSCL part and the critical development part, right? In exams, our students thinking about exams all the time. I can see the prompts, I think that, and so on. When you see so there's some good thing about prompts because, they remember it, Yeah, and when you see the exams, maybe I'm seeing this in my friend's perspective, what will he think? So I guess it does help us to understand the text better, but this was about critical reading development. So very quickly into students' evaluative account of the dashboard, since our focus topic today is learning analytics. What did they perceive to be the benefits, and what did they raise as some problems and challenges? So very quickly, easy to use, no issue. Helpfulness in terms of reading achievement, 21cc, reread critique and discussion profile, useful, generally, moderately positive, in terms of just their descriptive, useful of the dashboard for enhancing 21cc, essentially learning, 21C learning dispositions, all right? In terms of those four, I can share those with you in greater detail and the skill validations at another point in time to interested colleagues. There were also demonstrable learning gains in terms of shifts, positive shifts to learning behaviors that we witnessed over time. For instance, before a lab session where we introduced and took them through reflecting on their profiles and on their dashboards and on their learning behaviors, and after, right, the number of replies and comments, the number of lenses and the diversity and breadth of lens, the type of talk and the diversity of the type of talk, and also their level of engagement. I mean, this will reflect how many replies and comments they make with others. So the purple is one student from the outskirts being, after the lab session, wanting to move into to the middle or being more embedded in the social interactions or the critical reading interactions on reread. Sorry. Yeah. And in terms of the dashboard benefits, they could be clustered largely around generating greater awareness and reflection of their learning progress, enhancing motivation and engagement from their qualitative accounts, all right? Cognitive, affective, and behavioral. And the last one, cultivating a sense of reciprocal social citizenry in learning. Sounds like big words, but it's about help giving and help seeking. Understanding that learning is not purely an individual activity, but that they can help others and others can help them along. And sometimes we think this is very, intuitive, but not so to these students. So these are just some examples of our students' comments and reflections and accounts of greater awareness and reflection, right? So they were useful in monitoring my progress, what skills and critical lenses I used or not used, and allows me to know which skills I should practice more on. And these particularly, these are illustrative, all right, but they are quite recurrent in the student talk. I found my learning attitudes and my 21C skills were the most eye-opening. We showed them how they fared or saw themselves in terms of the 5 Cs, for instance. They were most eye-opening, allowed me to realize what type of attitude I had towards learning English. And this is quite classic of our students, but these are students who come to a realization that their attitude towards EL might not have been the best because they were learning for the sake of doing well in exams as compared to the sake of understanding the language. Thus, looking at it, I'm trying to change my learning habits and attitudes in a better and more positive direction. So I would say that I have to say, we just provided that it was passive. So even passive data, I wouldn't say it's completely useful, but even the visualization, because what were their prior experience, right? They had very little quiz scores versus something becoming a tool for their awareness and reflection. Enhancing learning motivation, where I stand motivates me to work harder, more motivated to comment, so that my social network dot can be bigger and brighter. They love that. So yeah, colors. Yeah, I will know who to look to for help. And the last one leads me into this point about cultivating reciprocal social citizenry in learning. The spider web, which a lot of them call it, some of our bubbles were bigger, right? So it showed us who we can find if we ever need any help in English. That is not 100% true because we have not assessed quality, we are coming to that, of their talk. But at least in terms of cognitive presence or defined in terms of engagement, there are people that they can look for help from if they just study the map. And some of the people whose bubbles are like smaller, they're out of the web thing, so we can ask them, right, if they need any help. So the value of social network analytics for nurturing the social reciprocal citizenry, we think is very important. And making these information or information explicit to our learners for the first time. Because what you make explicit to them, often what they get back is grades. And so how can we make the move to a more balanced mastery versus performance if the explicit feedback that we give them are predominantly about performance? So it's just a matter of making access to more information and meaningful information about what we value to be important, and therefore reflecting that back to them, then nurturing them or scaffolding them in the reflection process and goal setting process. So, two corresponding problematics being we found that the norm reference versus criterion reference visualization, which is an issue with assessment for a long time, right? It's not new, but that was something that was experienced by the students, and they articulated that. So comparing to peer best versus personal best, learning for performance or mastery. And sometimes it's not so, well, anyway, in the enactment, it's very difficult to make that design call sometimes, because equally half of those students tell you they're motivated by seeing that they're above the class average, and half of them tell you that, we're not so motivated. So what happens is that, or it actually has adverse effects, right? The second is about fostering connective literacy, which is this reciprocal social citizenry, which we find that it's actually really nascent among students because of, I think, their lack of exposure or explicit exposure to it, yet to emerge among many students. Now, very quickly, norm reference visualization, some love it. Okay, they love to see where they stand. It makes them, increase their participation, be more active, improve. They find it fun. They like the competition. Some of them wanted ranking system even, Hall of Fame, okay? Yeah, that's what they asked for. So that gaming theory actually comes in, right? On the other hand, some love it not. And these are examples of our students' voices, all right? Our students' voices about it being demoralizing, it's depressing. When you see that the class average is so high, the maximum mark you're supposed to get is so high, we are below average. Classmates are better at, we have not yet seen a student who's doing very well, who kind of articulated that they wanted to regress, but I guess they don't know that that's probably happening. But we see often the articulated, this student here says, why don't we compare it, like Andrew Martin's work on personal best approach. You can actually have the same effect this student was reflecting, trying to improve based on your past. I actually commented more this week, I feel better, instead of comparing with others. And he said, what, I'm last, what is this, it's not fair, then you cry. It's our Sec 3 students, okay? So adverse affective effects, of clearly seeing oneself. That social transparency, I think, really drives in the point, makes our adverse effects even higher, because it's now explicit and concrete, especially if one is at the bottom or the outside. So what happens is, sometimes we make that decision based on, well, if there is adverse effect for 1, and for 10, it's good, we might choose a decision of, it's not utilitarian in nature, we'll think of the 1 rather than the 10, right? So that's some of the kind of logics that we have to make. But SNA visualization, some were able to appropriate it, some were not. So some really liked it. They could see that by looking at the social networks, they understood social capital in learning. Okay, that means I can approach people for help, all right, or choose my friends, right, or not. And some, but most of the time, or help others along, right? So actually make agentic choices. But we found that that's not a sort of dominant literate practice that was very intuitive and embedded in the students. And I think to some extent the research shows that most of the time the choices are subconscious, yeah. And yeah, to some extent it's subconscious, I think, because they don't have the explicit information to choose it. But that gets us now in a bind, right? It gets us in a bind, and I'll come to it, why I'm in a bind currently. So most of the students demonstrated a very individual-based, a sort of scientifically erroneous or naive view about the power of social capital or social networks in learning. All right, and to some extent, it really reflects the prevailing school hegemony, if you will, of individual learning outcomes and skill acquisition, still being way more important than learning connections or interactions. all I'm interested in is the content. Well, it reflects our students very substantive based, which is important, right? But how do we raise more awareness and literacy around connectivity? That's important. So going forward, we are working on the teacher dashboard to inform responsive pedagogical strategies. Even our student dashboard, like for the social network analysis, is a question I wanted to ask you, because if we don't show names, if you show names, right, then, yeah, if you don't show names, then the power of that being a reference point to choose your learning partners explicitly, becomes impossible, right? Because you don't have that. But on the other hand, visualizing the names creates a whole host of other problems. Like, so what good does it do that student who's disconnected to see that he's disconnected, right? And so we think, we think that might motivate him to connect more, interact more, but maybe not. But anyway, in trial 3, which is in 2 weeks' time, we're testing 4 visualization conditions, because right now the school wants to implement it to all their classes. They didn't want it to be only one class. They saw the value in this. They wanted to do it for all year level 7 classes. So instead of having the control and comparison groups being reread and non-reread, it will be, we test the visualization conditions. So we're testing self and peer, and prompt and no prompt. So if we prompt the students, does that have more significant effect than others? So the overt feedback versus no overt feedback. And so just to wrap up, it's an issue really of, this is just a pedagogical dilemma that we have even in deciding what to visualize or what form of feedback to give the students in visualization form. And the best of intentions often come wrapped in barbed wire, right? So how can we at the one time, and this is something that I constantly ask myself, design for agency yet structure for discomfort? Because our students and our curriculum structures, it's uncomfortable for our curriculum structures and uncomfortable for our students and uncomfortable for our teachers to actually make space for reflection time, to make space for dialogic learning, to make space for awareness and goal setting. There's no time. And it's a real burden. How do we free up the structure, and how do we free up space for agency and for discomfort in learning? Thank you very much.
Whenever I see social networks,
Yes.
I'm always skeptical, because everything depends upon how you define a connection. And so I've even had trouble thinking of a lot of the way that social networks get connected, get represented in the literature actually meaningfully corresponds to some notion of social capital.
Yeah.
So in your talk, when you, and I can buy, though, that sometimes it probably means something, and we're measuring something that maybe matters. Oh, I'm sorry to sound so skeptical, but I'm being honest. Okay,
Well,
but in your talk,
expert of SNA is here, so I'll just pen the questions.
In your talk, you told a story of some students who, when they saw the network, felt enabled to make good choices about who they could go to for help and who they might want to select as friends. And actually, to me, that's worrisome, because then if the network itself means something to them that it doesn't actually need, then it could actually influence them to make poor decisions. And but they would think that they have this useful tool. So I guess what I wonder, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you probably talked about this, but then maybe I just wasn't paying enough attention on that slide or something, but I'd like to know more about how those connections were defined and how you validated that those connections actually do mean what it's sort of, saying to a student that they think.
Yeah, actually, we, for this one, it's very simple. In terms of our principle of, let me just bring that up. In terms of our principle, remember earlier our learning principle was that we wanted to foster social dialogic learning. So we wanted to encourage interactions, and the interactions was captured by replying to someone rather than just posting a comment. So students could post and students could reply. And the networks are actually based on their replies to one another and how many people you replied to, all right, how many people you replied to. Initially, we built in likes, but then, and the likes was a weight, and it added weight to the network ties. So the ties were primarily constituted of if students interacted with one another through replies, right? And like I said earlier, we couldn't look at the quality of those replies, but our teachers go through and moderate those comments. It's sort of manual at the moment. And teachers have teacher expert ratings of good comments versus not so good comments, which was implemented in trial 1 but removed in trial 2 for various reasons. So it was primarily based on number of replies and interactions to people because we wanted them to not just only comment but post comments. So what we said that is how prominent or influential are you in the we read network? That means in the we read discussion network. How prominent or influential are you? We also thought about these tags because it was passive. We didn't have time to go in to scaffold the students to make meaning of it. So a lot of the normative value of how to interpret these graphs were made explicit in terms of the instructions. So, and we said then, this is exactly what the students said, based on replies to one another's comments. The bigger or brighter color equals to greater prominence or influence in the network. The darker lines is the strength of tie between you and the other person. So this was what we told the student, and it was based on the number of replies and how they, and their notes replies to others.
Okay, so that's what I thought I remembered, but I
Yes.
wasn't sure.
Yes.
So that's exactly, I think, what I would challenge.
Yeah.
Because it's being conveyed to students that if a lot of people reply to you, or you reply to a lot of people, then somehow that number means something about your relationship with that person. But I'm not sure that the reality is that there's a correspondence between those two things. In addition, influence, what does influence really mean? Does it mean that people believe what you said? Does it mean that the conversation took a different turn because of you? Or does it mean, that you put a lot of text in there?
Actually, we could only control for bad quality, like spamming, and we removed that. We told students that we were removing those. But there were very little of those because they had very little time. But the point that you raise is particularly important because one of our limitations that we wanted to do, if you saw in the end here, I guess influence was probably, could probably be replaced by a better word. And we tested the face validity of some of these labels with the teachers and what would make sense and what would be most accurate in representing. So at the end of the day, we wanted to, it was only an indicator to students about who was engaging in interactive critical reading with one another. Right? So are you dialoguing with someone else? Are you replying to someone else? Or are you just making comments because there were students who were making comments? So that visual was primarily to show them the more you reply to others as they engage in reading and critiquing the text as a social generative process, and you can't reply if you don't read someone's comment, right? So embedded in that is you're reading someone's comment, then you're responding or you're replying. So there's some embedded value of replying, and that was our proxy. And so I take your point that making that proxy and over-claiming that or students misunderstanding that is an issue. And right now, but I think at the minimum, we went with that, and we'll have that conversation more tomorrow because we want to improve these, is the fact that we wanted to tell students who was not involved. Who are people that are on the outskirts, that are not engaged, that are not making comments, that are not replying to posts, that are not central in that network. So we're not saying anything about the quality of that network, and our students actually picked up and said that, well, it doesn't really mean anything, and it doesn't really mean anything, and people are gaming it because they realize that the more you reply, and you don't have to make very good replies, you just have to reply to a lot of people, and you get to the middle. Our students got that, right? Largely they got that, and there were some that then disengaged from even looking at it because they just essentially classified it as not useful. But there was this latent, what we wanted to tell students is that what is the primary learning behavior here? That don't just engage, it wasn't intended, because our intention was to get them to interact and discuss with one another. We can't guarantee that that discussion is of a high quality, but we say even if you just interact, we believe that it is more positive than not interacting. Yeah, even if you're the best student, there's still that collaborative, dialogic, generative process important to critical reading. So that was our design logic. Yeah, but I agree with you. We really need to grow in our text mining and appropriating tools that CMU have, and other colleagues have developed, and we really want to grow in that. And yeah, I'm eating into the panel time. So, and our afternoon tea.
A fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I guess I'm in
That's always the preface for a very difficult one.
Interesting. I'm sitting here thinking, okay,
How
I feel like I'm the old fart muppet at the back of Henson's, and I'm really quite excited by the fact that you're doing all this in an online environment. But I think that all of us here do not have to have prompts about thinking, oh, like this is an observation, this is an inference. I think that. I agree, I disagree. Somehow that kind of worries me a little bit, but in the present context of the new social genre, maybe it's there. But what concerns me more was the comment that you made, that you can't find time in a classroom to talk about critical thinking and critical reading. That distresses me. It really does. Because what it tells me is that we are creating automatons, and we realize that, suddenly we need to teach them how to become automatic critical thinkers.
Okay.
And I'm really worried about that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that worries me too.
It doesn't happen in Finland, I'll bet.
Yeah, and actually my closing slide, and actually that's why we're in this area of research, because when we say it's about time, and it's not a new, I'd love to hear from my MOE colleagues. It's not something new. It's about making time for new forms of learning, for new forms of for learner-teacher interactions, for new information and feedback loops and information, to facilitate new forms of knowledge processes, the move from performance to mastery or balance of both. And so that's a really important question. It concerns us too. It worries us too. And that's why we're in this room and with these dialogues, and these dialogues keep happening. And I'd love to hear some responses from our colleagues. And it's a systemic issue, right? You can't just have, it's a systemic issue. Curriculum time. There's timetabling software, and it is so complex. I couldn't, it's a real push.
My point is, every teacher, whatever the discipline, it is incumbent upon them to integrate that into their pedagogical practices. Where has the Socratic methodology gone? Out the window?
Well, actually, and that's my point, to leave us with, before we have afternoon tea, and then come back to continue that fascinating dialogue. I really think it's really important.
Well, it's almost a cardinal sin for someone from MOE to defend MOE, but I think the point to be, I fully agree with you, but an important point of distinction to make is not to conflate time for to develop critical thinking in a classroom, which we do through the subjects, with time that the schools put aside for research, additional research that the teachers are involved in. So in this case, I think in the context of what you were saying about time was putting aside time for the students and teachers to engage in research 30 minutes every week. So that is something that is useful, but I think it may put certain stress and pressure on the school. But on the other hand, I think what you are saying is that time allocation to develop critical thinking ultimately is definitely important, and I think it's already integrated in the different subjects that we have. So critical thinking is not unimportant. But I'm sorry for the cardinal sin there.
No, very important.
point.
I would just, I would just add, however, and balance it a bit, like as the researcher in the middle, that I was going to make a sort of, defensive observation about where we are at in terms of our Singapore education landscape, is that, firstly, and also my research, firstly, I'm not, that there is critical thinking going on, perhaps in other domains and in other areas outside of reread. So I can't say that, but here it was in one school, and it was in direct alignment of enacting the new EL revised syllabus, which had an explicit learning outcome and standards and benchmarks to be critical reading. But that intention set out in the curriculum, and that dilution or that enactment and how that's lost, perhaps in the marking, perhaps in the practice, perhaps in the classroom, perhaps in the curriculum, timetabling time. I wouldn't say this is purely research. It's actually a pedagogical innovation that is ground up, designed by the school as well. So I think it's not so much that school can't find time to do research, even great research like this. I'm kidding. But I'm just saying that, Cardinal C. No, but the fact that they are finding it hard to have time to shift practices and mindsets that is underpinned by different reasoning logics and different desired outcomes. So that's a very real issue that we need to work together as a systemic community. So that gets me out in the morning, all right? All things excellent are as difficult as they are rare, and it's great to have you all here on this endeavor together. So with that, we break for afternoon tea, and we'll come back for a discussion and have a closing synthesis. Thank you.